Audie Murphy despised him more than anyone. That statement makes it sound virtually impossible to believe in reference to one of the most decorated heroes of American history, one of the greatest soldiers to ever come out of the poverty-stricken Texas countryside, a man who emerged from obscurity to be not only a legend on the battlefield, but also a household name in Hollywood. But behind the medals, the fame, and the glowering aura, Murphy nurtured a resentment against one person in show business that he never really forgave. To realize why, it's necessary to glance back at the entire course of his life, from his earliest struggles to his last years stumbling through the curious gulf between war hero and unwilling movie star. Audie Murphy was born on June 20th, 1925, in the small Kingston community of Hunt County, Texas. His parents, Emmett Barry Murphy and Josie Bell Killian, were struggling poor farmers, barely keeping a very large family afloat through the hard times between the Great Depression and the low thunderings of global war. Audie was one of 12 children and the seventh of them. His life was one of poverty and hardship from his early days. His family did not have food, clothing, or even the simplest things in life. They lived a hard-scrabble kind of life, making do on whatever odd work and scraps they could obtain in order to get by. His father, Emmett, was no good, floating in and out of the house before ultimately leaving the family for good. That left Josie Bell to bear the weighty responsibility of raising so many kids nearly on her own. This broken home life pushed Audie to mature far too early, whereas other children may have been able to indulge in play, school, or the security of a stable home. Audie and his siblings were forced to bear adult responsibilities before they had a chance. His Irish heritage endowed him with strength and self-reliance, but it also carried with it an understanding of just how cruel life could sometimes be. His birth name, Audie Leon, had more significance because he was named in part for two men who had been kind to his mother when she had been left behind. Kindness was not something that he had known in his childhood, and maybe that was the reason why it had such a lasting impact when it finally arrived. In spite of all these hardships, Murphy did manage to go to school for a few years in the general vicinity of Northeast Texas towns of Farmersville, Greenville, and Celeste. But before he reached the 5th grade, schooling was not an option. Money was something that his family needed to survive, so Audie, still a boy, took to the cotton fields and worked long hours in the scorching sun for paltry wages. Those years of struggle instilled in him an unbending work ethic, but also left him with an unspoken determination never to be conquered by events. The loss of his mother in 1941 was a devastating blow, probably the most difficult experience of his young life. Audie had been particularly devoted to her, and when she died, his world was turned around. His younger brothers and sisters were dispersed into orphanages and foster care, and Audie bounced around Greenville in a series of menial jobs, cobbling together what little he could. But when World War II broke out, it provided him an opportunity he had fantasized about, a means of breaking free from the cycle of poverty, and, more importantly, an opportunity to prove himself. Murphy was eager to join the military immediately, not just to serve his nation, but also to remit money home to support his siblings. But at hardly more than 5 feet 5 inches tall and less than 120 pounds, he appeared much too young and weak to be a soldier. Initially, the Army rejected him, but Murphy was obstinate, and tenacity was his weapon of choice. On June 30th, 1942, he finally enlisted in the U.S. Army. It marked the beginning of one of the most unusual military careers in the country's history. By 1943, Murphy was deployed to Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. He was initially deployed to French Morocco in North Africa, where he soon discovered that war is not just about bullets and bombs, but also about disease, fatigue, and harsh territory. Heat, flies, and perpetual discomfort wore men down nearly as much as combat did, but Murphy soon adjusted, demonstrating to the other soldiers and his commanding officers that he was serious, disciplined, and completely unflappable in harm's way. In July 1943, when the Allies were planning the invasion of Sicily, he was promoted to corporal. The campaign turned out to be pivotal, and Murphy stood out in action that contributed to the capture of the port of Messina. He continued to move forward, receiving promotion to the rank of sergeant by the end of the year. During August 1944, Murphy demonstrated the full measure of his bravery in Operation Dragoon, the Allied invasion of southern France. There, he continually risked his life, fighting with a fearlessness that inspired all who were around him. For his leadership, he was promoted to second lieutenant, and his command was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. Later in the year, as the Allies advanced into northeastern France, Murphy again emerged. He risked enemy fire to lead assaults, rescued wounded fellow soldiers, and repelled counterattacks. By 1945, he was a legend among the 3rd Infantry Division, especially for his exploits in the Colmar Pocket, where he called down fire on German troops even after being wounded. It was during this time that he was awarded the Medal of Honor for fighting off the whole German company single-handedly, an action that placed him in history books. At the end of the war, he had a mind-boggling number of awards and accolades under his belt, from the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars. Following the war, Murphy's life took on a peculiar new phase. In 1950, he became a captain in the Texas National Guard, and by 1956, he was a major in the U.S. Army Reserve. But it was not the military that gave him new fame, it was Hollywood. Universal Pictures soon made the connection that a real war hero would add validity to the burgeoning market of war films. Murphy appeared in a few roles, but his breakout Hollywood role came in the 1955 film adaptation of his own memoir, To Hell and Back. Portraying himself, Murphy relived his war years on the big screen. The film was one of Universal's top 10 hits of the decade. Although he became more successful, he never fully accepted acting as his profession. It was just a job, not a vocation to him. He was still a soldier at heart. Murphy's private life was equally complex. Murphy wed actress Wanda Hendricks in 1949, a union the press loved. But the union was tumultuous from the start. Murphy bore psychological wounds from the war, what we now understand as PTSD, that complicated home life. Murphy had nightmares, episodes of depression, and a temper he could not contain. The marriage was dissolved in a divorce after 2 years. Murphy later stabilized when he married Pamela Archer, an airline flight attendant, in 1951. With her, he established a more stable family life, having 2 sons, Terrence and James. Fatherhood was a source of happiness to him, and amidst the chaos of Hollywood and his personal internal conflict, he attempted to be available and affectionate. In Hollywood, Murphy developed a reputation for speaking his mind, being truthful, and not being afraid to speak harshly of those he did not admire. He loved actors who were talented but humble, like James Stewart, a decorated Air Force pilot himself. But there was one individual he just could not abide, iconic actor James Cagney. Unlike most of Hollywood's rivalries, this one involved no competition for parts or screen time. For Murphy, it was a matter of values. Cagney, Murphy felt, was arrogant and condescending. Murphy did not arrive in theater classically trained. His arrival in Hollywood was on the battlefield, not the stage. He recognized that some considered him an outsider, or worse, a novelty, a soldier boy playing at acting. Cagney, Murphy said, was one of those men. Murphy said Cagney tended to treat him with contempt in Hollywood society. More than once, he remembered being addressed as soldier boy with a connotation that was intended derisively, not approbatively. Murphy was not offended by being referred to as a soldier, he was rather proud of it. But to have his sacrifice and service belittled by a sneer seemed to Murphy to be unconscionable. He also disapproved of Cagney's on-screen style, calling it repetitive mugging, a fake tough guy act that the public accepted but one that he himself could never admire. He was the same tough guy in every film, Murphy once said. It seemed phony to me. What bothered him even more was that Cagney did not serve in the military during World War II. Murphy never publicly denounced men who remained at home, but in private he bore judgments. He had buried too many friends to ever be able to completely forgive those who, in his opinion, refused to stand with him. Cagney, in addition, had endured gossip about being a communist sympathizer during the 1940s, but was cleared later. To Murphy, a man who had sacrificed everything for his nation, even the idea that someone of Cagney's prominence would not have been as committed to the ideals of America was unacceptable. "I didn't care how well-known he was," Murphy once stated. "All I knew was he wasn't there when it counted." The two men's cultural conflict couldn't have been more pronounced. Cagney was a brash New Yorker, big-mouthed and quick-talking. Murphy was a quiet Texan, unassuming and rooted in reality. Cagney lived for performance, even in real life, while Murphy valued genuineness above everything else. To him, Cagney was always acting, a man who never lowered his guard enough to let anyone see who he really was. Murphy had great admiration for many Hollywood actors, but would not give even a speck of praise to Cagney. He was not afraid to announce it in private discussions with his friends. "I hated him more than anybody in Hollywood," he admitted. "It wasn't jealousy. I never wanted to be like him. I just couldn't stand what he stood for. To me, he was everything phony about the business." This degree of contempt was unusual for Murphy, who generally shunned Hollywood feuds. He had a small group of close friends and reserved most of his opinions for private consumption. But when it came to James Cagney, he never relented. Even years after Cagney's death, when others were hailing Cagney as one of the greatest actors of his generation, Murphy would not come along. His resentment never waned. For a man who most prized loyalty, humility, and service over everything, Cagney was the antithesis. Audie Murphy's life, too short, tragically came to an end. On May 28, 1971, he died after a private airplane he was on crashed into a mountain near Roanoke, Virginia, in heavy rain, fog, and zero visibility. The pilot and 4 other passengers were also killed. Murphy was just 45 years old. His death was a shock to the country. He was given a full military burial at Arlington National Cemetery, and his grave is one of the most visited even today. Audie Murphy's legacy is one of bravery, perseverance, and sacrifice. He was the impoverished Texas farm boy who became America's most decorated war veteran, the reluctant thespian who starred as himself in one of Hollywood's greatest war box office attractions, the husband and father who wrestled with demons but never quit trying, and the plain-spoken truth-teller who reserved his greatest contempt for the arrogance he detested in Hollywood. He admired many, endured others, but of James Cagney he replied briefly and honestly, "I really detested him more than anyone.